Okay, Samachtes. So, Justin, we are in the midst of this book called Devorah, and the palm tree of Devorah, which is a reference to the verse which talks about how the prophetess or the judge, Devorah, would sit under a palm tree and dispense judgment, justice, and leadership, guidance to the Jewish people. But we don't really know why the author necessarily called this book by that name, other than the fact that palm trees are often associated with things having to do with Torah learning and perhaps sometimes the esoteric parts of Torah. So the book is really dealing with kind of teachings on Jewish mysticism, and specifically the part of Jewish mystical teachings which talk about the spheros. Are you familiar with that term, the spheros? But they are like manifestations of divine influence, which take on different aspects and have an effect on the way God runs the world. So that you might think about the analogy of white light being refracted through a prism, where that white light has contained within it the component parts which become visible through the refraction, through the prism. So too, then there is a kind of unified, holistic influence coming from God into the realm of creation in a very high place, which represents that kind of that oneness, that unity. But that light or that energy is refracted in the process of creation into component parts to make a world of multiplicity. The spheros have to do with that. The spheros have to do with refracting that kind of unified source of that unified energy coming from the one source and refracting into component parts, where each part becomes responsible for creating a certain aspect of reality. Okay, this is the kind of the general Kabbalistic system that the spheros represent, and this book is going through each of those refractions, each of those spheros, one by one, and we're actually up to the very last one. So, on the one hand, there's a lot that's been said, which would be very, of course, important to know. On the other hand, the nature of this last sphera, which is Malkuth, is viewed as being all-inclusive of all of the others as well. So that if you're going to come somewhere in the midst of the text, I guess this is a good way to come in, which is the last one, the last sphera, which is all-inclusive. This last sphera is called Malkuth. And Malkuth is the receptacle which reunifies all of the refracted divine energy as it had been passed through the previous spheros. And we've discussed how Malchus is considered to be compared to an oni, a poor person, and that's because Malchus has nothing. That itself is kind of a dichotomy. We've just said that Malchus has within it everything. So why is Malchus described as having nothing? The Zohar says that the Malchus has nothing of its own. Everything that it has, it contains from what it received from the spheros which are above it. In that respect, the Malchus is like the feminine. It's a receptacle that receives divine energy. It becomes impregnated by the divine energy, which flows down the system above it and into it. And the truth is that this Malchus therefore kind of corresponds to the highest of the spheros, which is Keser. But there's a significant difference between them. Yeah, Keser is also called Ein, if you remember. Keser is also called Ein, nothingness. But that's only because Keser is like null and void. It's almost non-existent vis-a-vis the source that it receives from, which is God. And therefore, as elevated, as an important, and as full as Keser is, And remember, Keser is like the sun. That's the crown. And Keser is like the mind. It's like the intellect. So that it has within it a tremendous amount of energy. It has within it a tremendous amount of faculty, which it then refracts into the lower spheros. But despite its being so full, it's nevertheless viewed as being Ein ve'efes vis-a-vis Ein Sof. Malchus is also like Ein. It's also like nothingness, insofar that it has nothing of its own. But you see, it's quite different. Keser has everything within it, and it is the progenitor of everything that comes below it. It's called nothing vis-a-vis Ein Sof. Malchus, has nothing of its own, but it's everything because of all that it received. So that Keser and Malchus are really like reciprocals. They're really like reciprocals. And therefore the relationship between Keser, the highest of the spheros, and Malchus, the lower, is like the relationship between the sun and the moon. The sun would be like Keser, which is the source of energy, bestowing life on everything. The moon has no light of its own. As bright and beautiful as the moon is, it only is so because it reflects the light that it receives from the sun. And that's the same thing with Malchus. Malchus has no light, no energy, no power of its own per se. Everything that Malchus is, and it's a tremendous amount, it gets as a reflection of from Keser. And in truth, that's its purpose. The purpose of Malchus is to reflect the energy of Keser, which is coming from Ein Sof, into the world. And that's what Malchus is. Malchus is kingship. Malchus is that sphere which is reflecting the kingship of God into the world. It's a receptacle that was created specifically for that purpose. So according to this, the more Malchus would have of its own, the less it would be able to reflect the kingship of Hashem coming from Keser. And therefore, we shouldn't think that Malchus is poor and poverty-stricken, as it were, which makes it like miskin, which would make the Malchus something unenviable. On the contrary, the whole purpose of Malchus was to be a receptacle to reflect the light coming from Keser into the world. And if it had anything of its own, that would just reduce its potential to reflect the kingship of God. And therefore, Malchus has the very important quality of humility. And that's another reason why Malchus is associated with poverty. The poor who have nothing of their own, they receive everything from others, but the fact that the poor has is a reflection of the giving of the other. And therefore, this is one of the reasons why we say in the Gemara that God created the poor. God created the poor in order for the rich to be able to give. Well, you might say, well, that's not fair. So the poor have to suffer in order for the rich to be able to give? Yeah? But the truth is, the poor are giving more than the rich are actually giving. Number one. And number two, the fact that the poor receive from the rich actually indicates there's a God in the world. Why? Because God is giving shefa to people to share with others. And therefore, the humble, the meek, the empty, the vacuous, the emptier they are, the less they have, the more humility they have, the more they're actually able to fulfill their role as being a receptacle for receiving the light from Keser and playing an important role in Malchut Shemaim, in spreading Malchut Shemaim. And that's what Keser is all about. So it's like the sun to the moon. And you think about it, the more a person is full of himself, the less he's able to receive from others. I'm not going to listen to what he says. I know myself. I don't need him to tell me. Or I'm not going to accept guidance from him. I can guide myself. So people that are prideful and arrogant and they're full of themselves actually have no room to receive from others. What's that? Yes. Very nice. Which actually makes them not wealthy, but poor. So you see here, you have a very interesting dichotomy operating within Malchus. Yeah, it has within it everything, right? It's very poor, but it has within it everything. But it's that very poverty and emptiness which enables it to have everything. And in fact, the fact, therefore, that it is so poor, so humble, which enables it to become so full with godliness, puts it in a position where it actually has everything. It's actually quite wealthy. Whereas something that has within it everything is considered to be nothing. That's Keser. Vis-a-vis, right? Vis-a-vis HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So somebody who's arrogant, full of himself, God says, you think you're something? Compared to what you could really be, compared to what spiritual beings are, compared to what Hashem is, you're really nothing. The poor person, the humble person, he's got nothing. Insofar as he makes himself a kli, Hebrew word? English word? Vessel. The fact that he makes himself a vessel, right, as a receptacle, would actually make him quite wealthy, quite full. And that's Malchus. Yeah. What did you want to say?
Could you repeat you said a sentence like it's a receptacle to the refracted.
I think that Malchus becomes a receptacle to receive the refracted energy originating from Keser. So it's very poverty which makes it so full. And if it had anything of its own, that would limit its ability to receive what's being brought down into it. Okay?
Thank you.
Now, just like the relationship between Keser and Malchus is like the wealthy to the poor, or the sun to the moon, it's also described as a relationship between thought and speech. So that clearly Keser is associated with the mind, as we've discussed. Keser corresponds within it. It has the faculties of Chokhmah and Bina, intelligence, understanding, das, knowledge. These are faculties. Yeah? So that Keser is about intelligence. It's about, intelligence. It's about thoughts. It's about intelligence, like the plane of thought. That's translated into the plane of speech, so that every speech is actually a manifestation or becomes an actual vessel in which is infused the thought that a person has. So that the thought is like Keser, and the speech is like Malchus. Okay? The Malchus, the speech, becomes the language, the letters, the words, the idea become a vessel to convey the thought behind it. Okay? So the power behind all of this, of course, is the thought that's being engendered in a person's mind. And that's what is full of fruit and laden with potential, but it can't be differentiated, it can't be expressed until it goes through the process of understanding, and then it's expressed into the building blocks of language. So that every letter is like that little block which receives within it the meaning that it's intended to convey.
So kind of like thought creates reality?
Thought creates reality. Thought is behind the speech, and the speech is the vehicle, the venue through which that thought is brought into the realm of reality. Yeah. And therefore, the thought is like the soul, and the speech is the body, or the thought is the Keser, and the speech is the Malchus. And we said that Malchus corresponds to bris, corresponds to the sexual organ, corresponds to the conduit through which, right, divine influence is brought down into the world for productive purposes. And it's interesting that we find the pasuk says, bris karsa l'safasayim. Just like there's a bris, b'ma'or, as we say, the bris in the flesh, that is the circumcision of the sexual organ, in order to remove the orla, take away those chitzonim, those klipos, in order to reveal the crown, which is the malchus, in order that the flow of productive energy should be brought down from Keser into malchus, into the world, from the mind, which we said is the origin for the creation of the productive fluid, which travels down through the body, the spinal cord, corresponding to the vav, Those are the spheros of Tiferes, the six, Vav, 6 spheros of Tiferes, until they're released and emitted into the world through the sphere of Malchus. You have the same thing going on in the mind. The mind is the seed of thought. That thought goes through the process of tzimtzum into Chokhmah, Bina, and Das, and it's finally translated into the place where it's relevant to have a bris. The bris is the tongue, right? The bris is the tongue. And therefore, just like a person is fruitful in the physical sense by injecting life-giving fluid into the world through his sexual, let's say, yeah, I meant to say not just the appendage, but the whole system, the reproductive system. So too, a person can achieve the same thing by having the fluidity of life-giving words, thoughts being expressed through his words, through his tongue. Now that tongue, as a vessel for Malchus, can also attract to it the klipos. The klipos are these impure forces. And the result of that would be that rather than having the productive potential of his mind be expressed in positive ways, a klipa can attach itself to a person's tongue and result in his speaking lashon hara, speaking sexually lewd things or harmful speech, right? Speaking fork tongues, is that it? Yeah? Yeah. Fork tongues, yeah. So that his tongue becomes like a vessel, not for purity, but for the serpent, for the snake, and his tongue goes rattling off impure, harmful type of speech. What a person has to do is circumcise that tongue, circumcise that manifestation of Malchus, circumcise that external kind of almost synapse, which is between the spiritual realm in his mind and the body, or the spiritual realm is mind and sexuality. Both of those places are like synapses, the juncture between the spiritual, the highest level, and the physical, and the lowest level. Those are places where the chitzonim attach. They're trying to become an intervention. They're trying to intercede in the point where the transmission between spirituality and physicality takes place, between Keser and Malchus takes place, between the mind and the Keser of the sexual organ, or the mind and the Malchus, the sexual organ, the Malchus of the tongue. That's where the chitzonim, that's where these external forces cleave, and they try and serve as an interposition to prevent that positive, productive energy flow from taking place. What we have to do is circumcise these places of Malchus, whether it be the Malchus between the legs or the Malchus between one's teeth. Those places have to be circumcised in order to remove any of these impurities and ensure that what will be expressed is going to be positive, productive, wholesome, something which is going to be used for growth and ultimately to reveal godliness. And it's for this reason that we find that Malchus is associated not only with the sexual activity, as we've spoken a lot about in the past, but also Malchus is associated with things having to do with speech, and primarily prayer. Prayer is the degree of Malchus, right? And it's through prayer that the Malchus Shemaim is revealed. We conclude all of the prayers with Aleinu Shabeach, where we talk about revealing the Malchus Shemaim, that all people in the world should know that Hashem is God. And therefore, prayer is about this. It's about revealing the Malchus. It's about removing the klipos, which would have a person talk about any number of things in order to waste that energy, to waste that potential of speech and have it spill out into foreign places. What we have to do is make sure that our speech is impregnated with holy thoughts, and that speech will then be fluidly directed in the right place. Where we spoke about how Malchus is associated with earthliness, in the sense of sexuality. We're talking about how acting properly sexually will result in the influence from Keser down to Tiferes, down to Malchus, directing that seed into fertile, proper ground, so that the inverted tree can grow into this world and create good fruit. But if that doesn't happen, Chas v'Shalom, if a person misuses that power, what he's causing is that that water should be spilt out into infertile ground, into wasteland, and it'll be used to make weeds and spurs and thistles, harmful types of spiritual things. The same thing goes with the power of speech as well. If a person uses the fluid, creative power of his mind to speak negative, harmful thoughts, his words become like seeds which are planted into wasteland, into a harmful area. And that way, his tongue becomes like a thrashing tool, which he uses to embarrass other people and to put people down and to speak nasty, harmful speech and all these types of things. We spoke about how this serpent is within our bodies. It came materialized as a result of the transgression, where the tongue corresponds to the tail of the serpent. The body of the serpent would correspond to our spinal cord. And the head of the serpent comes out between the loins. But that serpent can go either way. The tongue can be used to speak harmful speech. The body can be used to do harmful things. The sexual organ can be used also to create all types of havoc in the world and destroy family purity and family harmony and result in bringing all types of people into the world under all types of different circumstances and so forth and so on. That would all be right through the negative, harmful, poisonous venom of the serpent. But we mentioned how the venom of the serpent is also going to be used as an antidote, so that tongue, which corresponds to the tail of the snake, can be used to speak words of Torah. The spinal cord, which directs the thoughts of the mind into the parts of the body, can use to direct the body to do all types of very good things, mitzvahs and so forth and so on. And of course, if the person uses the sexual energy properly, it can be used not to destroy families, but to create beautiful, loving, nurturing families, make love in the world, right? And therefore, the nachash within us, that's the serpent, has both of these potential, and it's not coincidental, therefore, that nachash actually equals Mashiach. Nachash equals Mashiach. The gematria of nachash, nun, chet, shin, is the same as Mashiach, mem, shin, yud, ches, where the nun is in place of the mem and the yud. It would be Mashiach. In any case, we therefore have within us the ability to either, has v'shalom, act in a way of klipa, which would be proliferating the forces of the nachash in the world, where the purpose of the nachash was to elevate mankind at the exclusion of God. Partake of this experience. The reason why God doesn't want you to do so is because on the day that you do, you will be godlike. So nachash is about elevating man in place of God. And that's what the klipa is all about. Separating between God and man and giving man the feeling as if man is somehow separate, independent, and therefore can be arrogantly independent of God. And that would be the exact opposite of Malchus, where we said Malchus is humility. Right? The arrogance, therefore, is a result of the klipos coming and separating, dividing between God and man, in order to give man, who was created in God's image, the feeling and the sense that man is actually God, and therefore full of himself, which makes man really nothing. As opposed to removing the klipa, enabling human beings to feel the natural humility that they should feel vis-a-vis God, and therefore become full of, not themselves, but godliness. The more humans empty themselves of self and enable themselves to become full of God, that actually makes them something. Okay? And that's this dichotomy back again to Malchus. It's becoming something through being nothing. If somebody is something, it's only because he views himself as being something. But his self is nothing. In which case, filling himself of his something is really making him nothing. But if a person empties himself of self, he's removing nothingness from himself and adding into himself everything. And now through his nothingness, he becomes everything. Right? This is Malchus. These are the types of ideas that we should have in mind when we're learning about the sphere of Malchus and how we should use the teachings of Malchus in order to kind of elevate ourselves.
So then, in a real life scenario, like the Beatles director who committed suicide and said, "I have everything, but I am nothing," and that was his death quote.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of sounds kind of like he thought of himself, but really was nothing.
That's right.
This is the only thing he thought of was of himself.
Yeah, that's That's a that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. Yeah, he has everything, but to him, everything, to what him is everything is really nothing. And there's really no point in living for nothing.
Well, he didn't have to kill himself. He could have given it up. And then,
Yeah, but I'm saying unfortunately, he didn't have the Torah.
yeah.
He was thinking spiritually.
What?
Spiritually, he had nothing.
No, he said he was thinking very. What's that? I have everything, but I have nothing.
I have all materialism.
Yeah, but I have everything, but it's not fulfilling for me.
It's nothing, nothing spiritual.
He didn't.
Nothing spiritual.
Yeah, he wasn't considering.
Zero.
He wasn't considering giving up everything, which is really nothing, in order to gain something, which is really everything. So this, therefore, would be, and that's true. If a person is full of himself and therefore void of godliness, the person it becomes under the tutelage of the nachash, which makes him encapsulated in the klipos, and as a result of this, the person becomes severed from God, putting himself above everything, which more often than not is going to lead to hedonistic, self-aggrandizing, indulgent lifestyle, immersing a person in the impurity of everything, reducing himself to nothingness. And that's what happens. You find that's generally the trend. The people in this world who have the most really have the less. And that's what I was saying before about they're being really poor. Those people are really poor. Poor people. So let's see about the text. So in Samach Tes, at the beginning of the new chapter, Perek Tshi. How can a person accustom himself to midas amalchus? Rishayna lechulan, the first and foremost venue to connecting to the essence of the sphere of Malchus and living one's life accordingly, shelo yisga'e libo b'chol shelo, that his heart should not be haughty and arrogant regarding anything that he might have. V'yosim atzmo tamid ke'oni, and he should always make himself as if he is poor. Why? Because now hopefully this means a lot more than just what the words say based on our preamble. I hope I wasn't just rambling on, but the preamble should be helpful here to understand what he means here by making oneself poor. V'yamid atzmo, meaning making himself poor, making him as if he has, making himself out as if he has nothing, so that he is actually making himself a kli, like Malchus, to receive everything that God has to give. V'yamid atzmo lifnei konoi, kadal shoya v'mischanen, and he should place himself before his Creator like a poor person who is begging and pleading. And here's the reference to prayer, right? Where we said that Malchus is this ani, this poor person, and it has to do with a place where there is a bris, in this case the bris of the Sfasayim, the bris Lashon. Yeah, Malchus is also peh. The mouth is called also Malchus, and therefore it's a place where a person should ask for the needs from God, because that's an expression of humility before God. And therefore he says, this is the comparison. This is what he's getting at behind the scenes when he says the person should make himself as if he's poor, right? Asking for his needs. He's talking about connecting himself to the midah of Malchus in humility, asking God through prayer for his needs. And to accustom himself with this attribute, even if monetarily speaking he's wealthy. Even if he's wealthy, he should consider himself as if he's poor. Yachshov shen dovik imo Mikol asher lo me'uma. He should have in mind that no matter how wealthy he is, no matter how much money he has, none of that is guaranteed to be with him forever. He should think she'en davik imo mikol asher lo me'uma. Nothing that he has is stuck to him. V'une'ezav. Rather, he should think he's like forlorn. And he is actually dependent on the mercy of God always. This is how he should be thinking. Like a person who has nothing other than the food that he needs to eat and to subsist on. But he's not just talking about imagining this. He's talking about palpably internalizing the reality that no matter how wealthy he is, that wealth could be gone in an instant. Markets can change, calamities can occur, jobs can be lost, companies go bankrupt. So no matter how wealthy a person is, it is actually true, and not just theoretically true, it's actually true that a person can be impoverished in a relatively short period of time in what we call quickly overnight. And therefore there's no guarantee whatsoever that what a person has today he's going to have tomorrow. Number one. Number two, even if he does have tomorrow what he has today, he might not be in a position to enjoy it. God forbid, some calamity might happen overnight. He might have a stroke. And all of his money and all the food is not going to help him when he's being fed by a intravenous. Thank you. Yeah? Yeah? He might be the owner of a supermarket chain. Billions of dollars of food under his control. And he's kept alive by what? A tube. Yeah? He might have a yacht. He might have a souped up private villa in Aspen. He goes on ski trips and he's got a beach home in Hawaii and he's got a place in Prague and he goes to Vienna and let's not forget Athens, and he's got places all over the world. But he can't get there. Why? Because he's paralyzed. Or even if he's not paralyzed. God forbid, there could be all of a sudden some domestic problem and he's totally thrown out of whack. Greek islands? What are you, crazy? My son's become a drug addict. I can't go to the Greek islands. So what value of all of that? Anything can happen. And therefore, no matter what a person has, he should never feel like he has it. What I have is a gift from God. I'm enjoying it now by the grace of God. I thank God for giving me what I have now. And don't take for granted that I'll have it tomorrow, but rather pray, Hashem, may I continue to have your bounty and your grace tomorrow as you've given me today. That's humility. No matter what a person has, therefore, he should think, you're supposed to pray for your sustenance from God, even when you got your food on the plate, before you actually eat it. Hashem, help me. I should always have parnasa. I should have what I need to eat. The food's right here on the plate. You got your lasagna right here. It's steaming up there right in front of your face. You got your fork in your hand. You have to pray to God that he should give you food. It's right there. Yeah? Cut it off, put it on the tip of your... It's right here. You're about to put it in your mouth. Yeah? All of a sudden, the fire alarm goes off. Woo, woo, woo. You throw that thing down, you run out. Didn't help you a bit. They hit your food in front of you. Yeah? Anything can happen at any time. There's no way of knowing. And we have to accustom ourselves to thinking in these terms. Yeah? That's humility. No matter what I have, I should think, right? It's a gift from God. It's not mine. I don't deserve it. I didn't get it because I earn it. I have it only because of the grace of God. And it's for everything, not just in monetary, financial terms, which are the examples I'm giving now. It applies to emotional well-being as good. Yeah. I got a wife, I got children, everybody's happy and healthy. That's great. I'm living a good life. What's wrong with that statement? I have a wife. I have children. We're happy. Everything's great. God gave me a wife. God gave me children. He gave us happiness. That's all the difference. Yeah? I. You leave God out of the equation, that's a formula for failure. God forbid. Thank you, Hashem, for giving me a wife. Thank you for giving me children. Thank you for giving us a happy home. Just like you helped us until now, please help us as well in the future. Because we have to realize that everything is a gift from Hashem. Nothing's coming to me. You can't take anything for granted. And we should be thinking, humbly, thank you, Hashem, a servant before you, everything you've given, and may it continue to be the case as well. Same thing with mental faculties, person's intelligence, or other talents that he might have. If the person wants to go in the way of Malchus, it's about taking himself out of the equation, trying to empty himself of the sense of self, and realizing as palpably as possible that everything he has comes from Hashem, and the more he negates himself, like Malchus, the more he's actually going to get from Hashem. The more a person fills himself with his self, the less he's actually really getting from Hashem. The more of a nothing he's going to be. Right? The more of a something he makes out of himself, the more of a nothing he really is. The more of a nothing he views himself, right, the more of a somebody he'll really be. So therefore, even if a person thinks he's got all of this stuff, he should recognize it all comes from Hashem, and there's nothing guaranteed. God gives a person what he needs, his food, and that's it. Everything else, it's all from the grace of God. And he should humble his heart and make a poor person out of himself. What does that mean? Empty himself of self. Umagam be'est filosov. All the more so in the times of prayer. Now you see why he's mentioning here, right? Here you see he's mentioning the connection. He's referring here to the connection of Malchus to prayer. Tefillah la'oni kiyatoif. V'yachnia levavo v'yani atzmoi umagam be'est filosov shazo segula nifla. This is a great propitious time, the time of prayer. The opposite regarding all of this is as it says in the Torah, beware, lest you get into the following scenario. V'ram levavecha, that your heart will become elevated. Ram levavecha. V'shochachto es Hashem lokecha. And as a result of that, you will forget God. Why? Because your heart gets all full. You get full of yourself. Ram levavecha. You become full of yourself. Become full of your desires. The result is going to be V'shochachto es Hashem elokecha. You will come to forget God. She'ashichacha chachitzonis mitzuya sham. Why? Shichacha, which is kind of a byword for klipos. These negative, occluding spiritual forces, they are found there. Where? Found in places of haughtiness. And that's exactly what I was saying before. We were talking about before. Yeah? That it's the klipos which sever the natural connection that should exist between God and a person, giving that person the feeling that what he has is his as opposed to being a gift to him from God. He becomes therefore full of himself and he forgets God. He takes God out of the picture. And shichacha is a form of klipa. It's brought down that it's right the word. The root is shochach, shin, chaf, ches, where shin is a reference to shor. Shor is an ox. Chaf, kelev, a dog, and ches, chamor, ches. So that this klipa of shochach has three components: ox-like, dog-like, and donkey-like. And the idea is basically as follows, that the shor, shor muad, the shor has an inclination to gore, which means the shor is like an embodiment of anger, ferocity, damage, harm. Yeah? This is referring to the klipa that has to do with all of the negative attributes having to do with being nasty and harmful, attacking other people and so forth and so on. That's shore. That's associated with Esav. Esav is like a shore. Esav, the power of Esav is to go and to just trample down others. Right? Shor muad, just trampling others. The chamor is the klipa associated with not Esav but with Ishmael. Chamor, the donkey, is called chamor because it's like material. That's what chamor means, material. And we find that Avram, and in the Torah we find that Avraham told Eliezer to wait im a chamor. He's left Ishmael behind with the chamor. There's an association between Ishmael and the chamor. And this type of klipa has to do with everything having to do with like physical desires, physicality, and licentiousness or indulgence and things like this. Right? So that would be Ishmael. And then chaf, kelev, a dog is brazen, chutzpah. Right? All of the traits having to do with arrogance and pride and haughtiness and so forth and so on, that's associated with the klipa of kelev, and that's Amalek. So that shiracha, these three types of klipa, which are shor, kelev, chamor, corresponding to Esav, Ishmael, and Amalek, these are to be found by a person who is arrogant, who makes himself something of himself, who doesn't work on maintaining the natural humility he should feel in the presence of God and being thankful for everything. And the result of all of this is going to be these three forms of klipa are going to cause a person to forget God. He becomes angry and upset and obsessively interested in conquering others. Yeah, he's thinking only about himself. So he's gonna forget about God. Or he's acting like a chamor. He's indulging in all types of physical pleasures. He's going to be forgetting about God. He's interested just in fulfilling his desires. Or a person who's arrogant, haughty, he wants everybody to recognize him and consider him as important and everything else. So he's looking for the glory and the fame for himself rather than God. These three positions cause a person shichacha, to forget God, take him out of his life. V'David, hisnaheg b'mirazo harbe. However, David HaMelech, he acted with this attribute of Malchus to a great extent. So that if Avram is Chesed, and Yitzchak is Gvura, and Yaakov is Tiferes, David is Malchus. And David said, for example, Ve'ani tefillah, I am prayer. So you see a connection between Malchus and David, who is king, and Ochel Malchus, which is pay, which is prayer, which is a nova. And think about how David was chosen to be king. God told the prophet Samuel, go to the house of Yishai, and you'll find there among his sons the anointed, meaning the appointed to be anointed, of God. So by that time, David was ostracized by his family. He lived alone. He roamed the woods and the forest and in the wilderness, tending to his flocks. He was distanced from his family. And Shmuel comes to Yishai's home and says, I've been sent by God to choose, to point out, to see to show which of your sons is appointed to be the anointed of God. So Yishai brought out his first son, and a tall, handsome, strong, talented young man. The prophet says, no, not him. He's not the one who was appointed and chosen by God. You have another son? He brings out each and every one of his sons until he goes through all of them. The prophet denied none of them. Yeah. Have you no other son? So they started looking at themselves. Everybody knows there's David, but he's a bastard. David? It can't be him. The prophet said, what was that? Oh no, it's just that we have another son, a brother, but no, you can't be referring to him. So the prophet says, call him. David appears. The prophet takes one look at him. Baruch haba, Mashiach Hashem. Welcome to you who have been appointed as the Mashiach by Hashem. And these tall, intelligent, handsome, strong, wonderful young men. Him? You must be crazy. Why? Because David was humble. And because he had been ostracized, he was humbled. And therefore he was chosen among all of his wonderful brothers to be the appointed of Hashem. That's Malchus. That was the Ani. He was sent out into Golus, like Malchus. The Shechina. That's David. David says, Ki yochid v'ani ani. I am alone. And poverty, poor-stricken, I am. And in this way, he was emulating the sphere of Malchus, being alone, not having other spheros next to it. And he was poor, being at the end of the line, very behind all of his brothers. But because of this, he was zoche to the Malchus, because he was acting in the meat of Malchus. Shari kol anshe beisoi kol echad ve'echad tzorich lihazer la'atzmo ma kulem elav. Now he's going back to this idea about a person who's wealthy. Yeah, he says all the people of one's household, everyone has to look out for himself. Uma kulem elav. And in the end of the day, what are these family members of his to him? Afilu ishto vanov, even his wife and his children. Ma yo'ilohu, how will they help him? Bihi osu nishpat lifnei abore. After 120, when he dies, he leaves them behind and he comes up alone in front of the heavenly court. Will his mother, with his wife or his children be able to help him then? He's alone. And therefore, he should think about humility. Now, not everything that he has. He was born alone, he'll die alone. He was born naked, he'll die naked. When a person dies, he's stripped of everything. Stripped. Has to go through WordPad. No, Notepad. They send him through Notepad. They strip him of all of his, what do they call that? When you set the fonts of the thing,
Characters?
no, I meant to say the, when you,
Control delete.
you know, the style, you set a style for this.
Font style.
Format?
Yeah, format. Yeah. Something like that. Yeah, he's stripped of all that. Obes siluk nishmaso, when his soul departs, so he's going to be left alone. Therefore, he should not indulge in everything he has now because it's fleeting, it's passing. Klum yilavu. Elad Kivro, will anybody be able to escort him any further than to his grave? Once he's 4 feet under, so that's 6 feet under, that's it. Mayim lo be'es dinov mipesach kever ve'elach. How are they going to help him in his judgment from the opening of the grave and onward? Lefichach yashpil v'yisaken atzmoi b'soy demidazos. Therefore, while a person's living, he should not wait till he dies. While a person's living, he should work on this attribute of humility and not take for granted the fact that he has a wife and children and is surrounded by loved ones and has plenty, but rather he should enjoy all of these things in the proper measure, however with humility and with the idea that that's ultimately not the purpose in life. These are tools to get him through life in order to enable him to fend for himself once he goes to the other side. That being said, of course, if a person does lead a spiritual life and he conducts himself spiritually with his family member, and he influences his wife and his children in a positive way, then he's actually leaving behind a spiritual legacy that will help him even after 120. Right? So what he's talking about here is If a person puts all of his emphasis on indulging in the physical aspects of what surrounds him in life here, when he leaves that, none of that is going to go with him. It's all going to be left. However, of course, that doesn't preclude the fact that if he used the material surroundings that he has in a spiritual way, then that will leave for him a legacy that can help him, so that his children who continue to learn Torah, practice mitzvos, pray on his behalf, and so forth and so on, will help him there. Right? But he's not talking about that. He's talking about a person who feels content about the physical fact that he's got a wife and a children and a home and a family and a livelihood and everything like that. That's not going to go with you. Right? In any case, these are thoughts that a person should have in order to live his life currently now with Malkuth, and not have to wait to be stripped of it all at death. So let's conclude here, and we'll continue B'ezras Hashem next time we meet.